Hello, welcome to Ludonarrative Dissidents. This is episode 5, Bluebeard's Bride. And before we begin our discussion of this game, there is a content warning. Bluebeard's Bride is a game about the terrible realities of women's lives. That is a quote from the game itself. It discusses sexual assault, body horror, torture, murder, suicide, and other horrific topics. Our conversation about this game will touch on these topics as well. Thank you for your understanding. This is our next game that we are discussing. And of course, with me, as always, is Greg and James. So Bluebeard's Bride is a game from Magpie Games. It is written by Whitney Beltran, Marissa Kelly, and Sarah Richardson. And it is a heavily modified, powered by the apocalypse game based on the fairy tale of Bluebeard. In this game, in a short version of it, what it is about, the players, 3 to 5 total, including the groundskeeper, who is the GM slash referee, and then the players all play aspects of the bride. Each aspect is called a sister. Sisters represent a different aspect of the bride's personality or her traits. And they are archetypal in nature. There are 5, and they range from the Animus to the Witch.
Animus, the Fatale, the Mother, the Virgin, and the Witch.
The game is about exploring Bluebeard's house while he is away, seeing what is in the room, each room, to ultimately it's about investigating Bluebeard himself to figure out whether you should be faithful to or disloyal to him. And then what happens when the bride reaches the final room? What is the end of this fairy tale? Because there are many versions of the fairy tale, and the book it points out that, there are many different versions. The version that the book tells is that the bride is killed by Bluebeard at the end because she enters the one room he is forbidden.
Yeah, we should do a brief version of Bluebeard just for people who aren't familiar with the story, which is that a woman marries this rich man with a blue beard and is brought to his huge, elaborate mansion and is told, "Oh, well, I'm going away on a trip, and you're the mistress of the house, and you can go anywhere and do anything you want, except for this one room." And there's this small, we'll say, gold key that opens the forbidden room. And he's like, go anywhere you want, but that's my place. And off he goes. And she thinks, oh, I shouldn't go in that room. I shouldn't go in that room. I shouldn't go in that room. But, man, what's in that room? And so she opens up the room and finds a just horror show of dead ex-wives, all murdered by Bluebeard, at which point he sweeps in behind her and says, you had one job, which was to not look in the room where I keep my murdered ex-wives, and now you must join them. Mm-hmm. And it's called Bluebeard. So that is my extremely short version of it.
Yes.
It's worth saying that in many versions, including the original Charles Perrault, she doesn't die. She gets away, usually because she's saved by a man, usually her brother, who conveniently, in the way of fairy tales, rocks up and dispatches Bluebeard, or at least helps her away. But that is explicitly within this game. She dies.
Yeah. Can.
Yeah.
She can.
Well, within the story they tell at the start,
yeah.
And they spend several pages recounting the story. She dies.
But there are other endings possible within the play of the game. All of them, however, I will point out, are bad.
Yeah, there's no happy ending. There's no.
And then you get revenge on Bluebeard. You kill him and you take all his stuff. No, this is one of those games.
Mm-hmm. No. The other thing we didn't say is it is explicitly a one shot.
Yes,
it's a single session game,
but a replayable one shot.
Oh yeah. It's not a one and done. It's designed for repeated play and should be an experience that grows and differs every time it is replayed. This is not like rerunning a D&D module 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
It actually suggests that you can incorporate previous brides into your next iteration of the game, where if a bride got killed, she returns as one of the horrors that haunts the house. And I can see where if I'd played this, if say James had run a session of this for me, and, when we all had our shiversome fun with our bride dying, and then a year later I played it with a different group, but he introduces what is clearly the wreckage of the previous game lurking around the house making trouble. I can see how that would work really well. That would be, as they say, a nice callback.
Yeah, this is very explicitly a horror game. At the beginning does mention safety tools and sort of talks about some of the topics that can arise from the game and how to deal with that. But yeah, the idea is that it's 3 to 5 players telling a horror story collaboratively, and what happens about the fate of this young bride and the thing and the wonders and horrors she sees in this mansion, which is obviously pretty explicitly like unnatural. Like there are fantastic creatures and artifacts and monsters lurking around, and pretty much anything can happen. It is the realm of dark fantasy or horror. So
yeah, I would call it surrealisme guignol. It is extremely bloody, weird stuff that aims to rummage around in your subconscious mind and force things to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a very meta game. I don't think I've ever read a more meta role-playing game. It exists on the level of archetypes and stereotypes and those deep Jungian concepts that live, deep within us and help define the way we see the world, and which is where fairy tales live as well. And it's explicitly engaging with those. It's not trying to tell you a nice story. It is trying to get inside your head.
Yes. And it's doing this through a single story. It is also a role-playing game designed around a single story. It is only meant to tell the story of Bluebeard and his bride, or Bluebeard's bride, really. It's about the bride. Like, Bluebeard is not... is explicitly not meant to be a protagonist or sympathetic. He is a force of nature, and not to be sympathized with. So
he's the Arctic in John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah. So
the force that keeps you constrained, but is not present to be negotiated with, I guess is what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I didn't get the feeling that he is ever intended to develop as a character. He's just there.
Right.
Well, I mean, you learn about his, like, I think part of it
you learn
is
about women he's killed or forced into suicide.
Right. Or forced into suicide or turned into monsters, or they become monsters in order to please him. Like that's his backstory, the horrific things he has done. So yeah, he stands in as a metaphor for the patriarchy, really.
Yeah, when you were talking about the version of the story where her brother comes and saves her, I'm like, oh, so okay, probably the original story of Bluebeard was written as a cautionary tale to warn men to not marry women with brothers.
I did look it up. The original Bluebeard has an explicit moral. One is, and a lot of folklorists believe that the original moral is, women don't be curious about things, obey your husband. But the corollary moral that is written explicitly in the version I read says that husbands, you cannot ask your wife to do the impossible. But that's obvious, seems to be added as a, after thought. Yeah, I suppose we should. If you're playing this game, definitely read the frontis before we get into what the game does. Definitely read about the X card system, which is this is for because of the topics this game can broach. You need safety tools. Now, this X card is not the only one. There are multiple safety tools on there, out there, but like it is certainly one of the well-known systems. And the idea is that there's a physical card in the center of the table that anyone can tap when somebody broaches a subject that they are uncomfortable and wishes to avoid. So
not even uncomfortable, I would say, with safety tools. It's like more, this is the bad kind of bad and not the good kind of bad. Mm-hmm. Because there's all kinds of stuff that'll happen in any horror game that will, on one level, make you uncomfortable. And in some ways, that's what you sign up for, right?
Right.
If I play Delta Green with Dennis Detwiller, I know I've set myself up to explore the nihilistic darkness of the human soul, and and I'm into it. I'm there for it. But there are times where, I'm going to be playing a game and it's suddenly like, okay, let's turn this into an explicit rape scene, and I'm just going to be hammering that X card like I'm one of those guinea pigs that got the wire to the pleasure center of their brain. I'm just going to be pounding that thing and be like, no. This has gone from being a pleasurable, distant, intellectual exercise into territory that I don't want to get into, which it's important. And I do believe that a key development in gaming is this idea of safety tools. And I believe in them because for the same reason that I believe in having a sheath for a knife. And if your sheath is strong, you can have a sharper knife. And if I have robust safety tools in play, I can explore deeper, nastier, darker stuff with the knowledge that people can nope out if they need to. Mm-hmm. Right? Am I just being weird, or does this make sense?
Completely. People forget that the concept of role play and the term itself actually came from psychotherapy. It's a tool. It's a tool that can be used to affect and change people. And there are role playing games out there that are being devised and used in therapy to heal people. But it's a tool. You can't build a tool that's only there for good. Role playing is a powerful thing, and we forget that a lot of the time. So I think the X card is really valuable. It should also be said that when you tap the X card, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say why you're uncomfortable. You don't have to say I'm uncomfortable. All you do is you tap the card and the game moves to a different place. It's a no foul thing. It's anyone can use it. You don't have to say why.
And it can be hard to keep that no foul feel of it. When I'm running a game and someone X cards me on something that I did not think was particularly bad or edgy or distressing, it's hard not to feel a little rejected and a little that, they don't like my stuff. But I mean, that's my problem. That's not their problem. And I should just be the mature adult in the room who's like, okay, well, if I'm running a game and someone's not having fun, that's my problem. That's actually our problem, but it's the problem that only I can fix for us. So,
Yeah. And it works much better with stuff like Powered by the Apocalypse systems, which are essentially a collaboration between the GM and the players, rather than more tightly scripted, more linear plots, more pre-written stuff, which may have built-in story beats and stuff. No, the story has to go to this point, or it's not going to work as a story. If someone X cards out at that point, the story is in trouble. But
I'm not going to genocide a bunch of orcs. What am I, a monster?
But yeah, stuff where the story is evolves and develops and is collaboratively created along the way. The X card fits perfectly within that, and I think the fact that games are now incorporating it within the rulebook as an explicit, you should use this as part of your play, can only be seen as a good thing.
Yeah. Certainly, I've seen a lot of discussion in the greater horror community, not just games, but fiction and movies. Written fiction and movies, that it is a way to confront your own traumas. In fact, I saw some discussion on social media about like there's some horror fans believe that that horror is only for those who want to confront their traumas or have catharsis through their traumas. And that if you aren't traumatized, you shouldn't be into horror. It was an odd statement, but like,
yeah, that's a weird hill to die on.
But yeah, that is, that's a different discussion, but it's a long-standing thing that you use, that horror's appeal is, for some people at least, that they can like talk about the things that have harmed them in the past without, actually confronting them. So,
well, I'm trying to, I wish I knew the source on this, but there was someone who said, yeah, people are always surprised that women, when they meet a woman who's a horror fan and who likes these slasher movies, and this woman who's writing this is like, let me tell you why I like them, because they are the genre that explicitly tells me I'm not being stupid for worrying. It's the one that isn't. It's the genre that isn't telling me everything will be fine. You don't have to worry. You're just being silly with your not wanting to go in the basement. And sometimes it's nice to have something that says, no, it's bad. You need to be careful and you need to be aware.
Interestingly enough, I just saw a movie that really emphasizes that in sort of the long term. It's the 2018 Halloween, the reboot sequel that stars Jamie Lee Curtis, and is basically ignores all the other sequels and takes place after the original. And it's like 40 years later, and Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, this has defined her. She's turned her house into a fortress. She practices firearms every day. She has traps set up in her house. And she taught her daughter how to shoot, and that's been the source of major emotional strife in her family, because she's just waited for the days for the killer, Michael Myers, to escape. And the rest of her family just, oh, Mom, you're being silly. This is never going to happen. He's never going to get out. You're just alienating us. You're just freaking out for no reason. And, obviously Laurie Strode was right, but
it would be a very different movie if they were right. And this was just the intricate portrait of a woman who can't let her trauma go, but no.
Right. But yeah, so like they're examining like the long-term ramifications of, dealing with this kind of violence. And, so I feel like that's an interesting, and you've seen it before too, like Terminator 2, that was kind of a whole subplot, of Sarah Connor's character. So, it doesn't go. And this is also what Bluebeard's Bride is about, is like the long-term ramifications of, what it's like to be a woman, of like what the realities of patriarchal violence are, so, and how they affect everyone,
my notes about what it does, we've covered that it's it models psychological conflict by having players stand in as psychological facets. My notes say edgy ambiguity, mature audiences for real. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times the mature audiences label is on stuff. It's like, oh, there's gonna be boobies. It's mature audiences. Whereas this is, no, you are going to have to think about things that have no clean, clear solution and are very unpleasant. It's, grown-up audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Grown-ups is a good word.
So,
yeah, I don't think this would appeal. I think this would only appeal to grown-ups too. I mean, I don't think the sort of, I guess the stereotype is the edgelord, the guy with the trench coat and katana who's very into brooding and extreme violence and gore, but only in sort of a gratuitous way. This is not.
This ain't that.
Yeah, this is all, everything, like the whole, every single rule in this game, every bit of writing in this game is about taking themes that your players establish at the beginning and then reinforcing them, building upon them, and like causing strife and misery, and just, tailing a very weaving a very dark story from these building blocks you set out at the start.
My next note is, it's a too tight corset for the soul, claustrophobic, feminine, and built to exclude a happy ending. In a horror game, these are all positives.
Yeah, it's very constrained. It's very constrained. I mean,
Absolutely.
Two main constraints. First of all, there is only one active character within the game because everyone is playing a facet of the same human being. And this is not new to this game. This has been used a few times. Everyone is John. Or is Everybody is John, which is a one-page game, which I think kickstarted recently in a much bigger version. But the one-page game is still out there, where you are all different personalities within the head of a violently disturbed man, I think living in Cleveland.
That'll do it.
But that's a competitive game. You are fighting for control. It's very fast. It's very funny, violent, and gratuitous. Whereas Bluebeard's Bride is explicitly cooperative. The different facets of the personality, the different archetypes are working together.
Well, not always, though.
Not always, but the intention is that there is a common cause, at least.
Yeah, that's true.
There was a game in the mid to late 90s that came out as a proper published game, where I think you're all human personalities trapped within the body of an alien, and that's
Chaotic.
Chaotic, yes,
with a K.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember the names of the streets in my town, but I can remember Chaotic.
Wow, well, you're one up on me there. Yeah. So it's been done before, but what it does here is it uses that not simply as a clever mechanic, but as a way of creating claustrophobia and tension, because you are, not exactly wrestling for control. You can hand over control at any point. And I don't, unless I missed a rule, the other personalities can't grab control off the active player.
There are moves that allow them to do that. Certain archetypes have, I want to say Fatale has a specific move that lets her grab control. But there are specific moves that let you do that. There's also moves that let you give up control.
Yes.
To avoid damage. Trauma.
Quite explicitly, there's the pass the key. But the other area of constraints is simply what the character can do, because this uses moves in a very Powered by the Apocalypse way, and what the moves can do, and simply the number of moves is very small, and what they let you do is behave in the way that a new bride within a certain type of social structure would be allowed to behave. This is not a typical role-playing game in which you can do anything that comes to your mind or anything that's reasonable. You can only do a very certain restrained subset of moves, and I have a list of them somewhere, but I'm sure one of you two can jump in ahead of me.
Well, what I was going to say is I wasn't going to list the moves, but just the idea that, yes, it's very constraining, but that is, again, a feature and not a bug.
Oh, yeah,
It follows the trajectory of Bluebeard's Bride, but this is an extremely archetypal story for a reason. And complaining that, you can only play one story with it is... I don't think anyone is going to make that complaint who gets it or who enjoys it and is into it. It's like you never hear a romance novel fan say, it was very disappointing. They got together in the end and they lived happily ever after. And you never hear a mystery novel fan say, it sucked. At the end, the detective figured out who did it. It's, when you enter the structure, the end is implicit, and that is part of the pleasure of the structure. There are lots of genres where unpredictability and crazy wild endings are the norm rather than the exception, but there are others where it's like, no, we know what the end is going to be. It's cosmic horror. You are going to encounter something terrible. Deal with it. That's what it says on the tin.
Yeah, no, that's true. And this very structured gameplay is really, literally spelled out, like on page 90, they have very like a set of lists for the session of like what the order of play is. It's almost at a war game level of like, first you tell the fairy tale on step 1, then everyone makes characters or like picks sisters, which archetypes they want to play, and then you explore rooms, which is the main section of game where you enter a room, investigate it, and then leave the room until you there are 3 possible outcomes. 1, you get 3 tokens to fulfill up, I believe it's 3, to fill up the faithful track, or enough tokens to fill up the disloyal track, or all of the sisters shatter. And when they shatter, they've essentially taken so much trauma, they become sort of a co-groundskeeper character, and they become, more antagonistic to the remaining sisters. And those are the 3 possible outcomes. And that's it. That's the order of play.
And within and it always ends with you entering the final room. And the final room is where you learn the truth about Bluebeard. And there are variations. You can show up to the final room with all your faithfulness fulfilled and either enter or just peek through the keyhole. And then there's another option where if you're unfaithful, you can either enter the room, I think, or run back to the town and try and tell them how terrible Bluebeard is. And there's explicitly no chance of persuading the people living nearby that Bluebeard is actually bad. It's, if you do that, it's like, okay, how does Bluebeard fuck that up for you and avenge himself on your family?
Right. Each of these outcomes, they're basically the groundskeeper asks the group a series of questions, asking each player in turn the first question, then the second player the second question, and so on. And the first question for disloyal outcome, if you present your evidence to the town, the first question asked is, what does the town do to rid themselves of the bride's disloyal ravings? So like, which states what the town thinks of the bride's evidence. So which is also very powered by the Apocalypse way of doing this as a series of questions that someone answers.
Oh, I broke this out, actually. I'm like, there are only 5 possible endings, which are get killed, be co-opted by Bluebeard, fail to get justice, your family pays for your escape, or you become a monster yourself. Mm-hmm. That's it. There's no happily ever after in that list.
No. And that's kind of the point. I mean, that's not kind of, that's very much the point. That is the core of this game. Because everything is an examination of gender. I mean, of what, and that is sort of the heart.
The heart, the constraint and helplessness of the feminine position within culture.
Yeah, so this is a game that knows what it wants, and is very focused and and executes it beautifully. One thing we haven't mentioned is the actual the book is one of the most beautiful I've seen.
It's so gorgeous.
A role-playing game. The cover has like this gold gilded design on it. It has beautiful art. It is fully colored, but sort of,
limited palette, full color. It really just uses white. It uses sepia, black, blue, and gold. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's when you look through it, you see that there are graphic design and layout has 3 credits, and I'm like, oh yeah. When you look through it, you're like, yeah, this is the work of 3 people.
Yeah, there are two things about it, though. I would also say it's only 128 pages, which that's fine. I've done games shorter than that, but it's a $50 game, and there are occasional moments where the design dissolves into font soup. There's just too many typefaces on a page, and the design becomes muddled. I'm looking at page, I think it'd be 124, though I'm on the PDF. It's a little bit hard to tell. It's a boutique item. It's for those who want this kind of game and are prepared to pay for it. This is a truly beautiful object. But at $50 for the book, it's not for everyone.
No. I would say
the PDF is a lot cheaper, I must say. The PDF is very, very much affordable.
I think I got my copy by swapping a box set of either Delta Green or Unknown Armies for it. So, once again, proving that the gaming industry really makes the most sense as just an elaborate structure to allow creators to trade nice versions of their games with one another.
No arguments there. That was where most of my roleplay collection came from back in the day.
The beginning of the session, in terms of what the game does, the creating the sisters. Now, sisters basically, even though this is powered by the apocalypse, there are only 3 essentially stats for characters, and there's basically blood, carnality, and resilience, and they only range from -1 to +1. So basically, one is a -1, one is a 0, one is a +1. And your +1 is already filled in based on your archetype. So the characters creation is sort of answering these questions. So it's all role-playing based. The groundskeeper asks you certain questions based on your archetype, like for the fatale, what does the bride's mouth look like? And then these are kind of the ingredients that will go into creating the rooms later on, and sort of the themes. Basically, the groundskeeper's looking for what sort of themes and ideas are really resonate with the player, so they can create rooms that are interesting. So if, like, the player playing the witch talks about being interested in dark power, well, then the groundskeeper can then introduce rooms that show, well, there's a hell of a price to pay for dark power. But you also create bonds with other players through the sisterly bonds. And this also is used to create tension between the players, to give them sort of conflicting agendas. Maybe one sister wants to prove her husband is faithful, the other one is disloyal, and the other one wants to view him as disloyal. And so, which creates more role-playing opportunities. But and that's all you have to do for creating sisters. Again, I keep saying characters, but they're
have we moved into the how it does it segment of the show, do you think?
I was still thinking for what, because this is sort of like, I feel like a large part of this game is creating what individual, there's so many ideas and possibilities the book sort of gives you, especially when you have some of the I do have one of the supplements, the Book of Rooms, and that sort of gives you a lot of examples of the horrors that can be shown up in rooms. But the book also has a lot of examples of play. And sort of the core of the book is creating horrifying and unique rooms for this for the bride to encounter.
And within a very deliberate sequence, which I'm sure we'll come on to as well. In fact, I mean, you mentioned examples of play, and I've talked in previous episodes about how the weight that I put on a good example of play, and this book is absolutely loaded with them. And a cynic would say that it was a way of filling out an already, quite short book and making it a bit longer. No, I think they're absolutely crucial. This is a game that needs to be demonstrated. You need to understand how it is supposed to be played, how individual sequences and how the mechanics mesh with the narrative. And the examples of play are absolutely there to do that. The first example of play I have a slight quibble with, is one that explains basically what happens when you're trying to, initiate a new room. You start off, the bride selects a key or says, I'm selecting a key.
And describes the key. The GM
the groundskeeper prompt says, describe the key, and uses the description of the key. And these are not your regular door keys. These are not small brass objects with, jagged edges. These are hugely elaborate, engraved, ornate, inlaid thing. You can let your imagination go wild, and the groundskeeper then takes cues from that to set up what's going to be in the next room, along with elements from that particular bride's character and elements that have come out in the character generation and the wedding vows as well. But that particular example of play, and I've lost it. I'm scrolling through and I'm trying to find it.
The Virgin describes clunky, badly carved wooden key that's too big for her hand. I'm on page 76, curating the rooms.
No, this is way before that. This is a page. Here we go, 22. It's keys and doors, but the thing, my understanding of Powered by the Apocalypse, as I said, is that it's very collaborative. This is a sequence in which the bride, the animus, who is the player, the character of the player who currently has the bride's wedding ring, says, I want to get out of here. They're being pursued by, it says, a quiet ghost. I want to go into a room that's to see I get away from it. No, I go into a room, says what they want to do, and it's then the groundskeeper who says what happens next, who describes their action, which is you sort through and you find a key. The animus describes the key, and it's a great description. The key's made of soft gold. It's slightly warm, like it's been left out in the sun. It has designs on it that look like something from Aztec art. There are little rubies embedded along the key's spine that are reminiscent of drops of blood. Well, I mean, as a GM, that's exactly, that's spurting all kinds of inspiration already. And I'm just reading this thing. And then, the key goes in, and we'll go in. I put the key in the keyhole and turn, and that's basically where the example of play stops. Oh no, wait, I missed a bit. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. The animus describes the key. The groundskeeper, who is called Whitney, one of the names of one of the designers, describes what the door looks like, what the corresponding door looks like, which of course is then also engraved with bad symbols and stuff. And the example play ends kind of as the bride steps through. It's weirdly passive. It's a necessary sequence, but it really emphasizes these constraints that we were talking about. That the bride is not fully in control of what's going on. They're very much in control of certain elements of the narrative and of the bride's actions. But essentially, it's very much the groundskeeper who is in control.
You may make the moves you are permitted to make.
Exactly. Right. Yes. And in this way, it's absolutely not a typical Powered by the Apocalypse game by any means. No. That doesn't mean in any way that I'm saying it's bad, just saying that if you see the Powered by the Apocalypse logo on the drive-through page or on the back of the book, do not assume that you are going to be getting that kind of typical experience.
Yeah, there are some moves that use dice, and like I said, the attributes to roll, and it's 2 through 6, failure, 7 and above, a hit. But that's it. It's a very simple, and there's a lot of moves that aren't triggered that have no dice rolling at all.
I felt it should have had the courage of its convictions and gone fully diceless, but then I've been an advocate of diceless gaming for 25, 30 years.
I'm not gonna argue with you. My notes are, is PBTA the best fit, or was that a marketing decision? Because I'm like, this is a one-session, high-structure game built on a framework that started with Apocalypse World, which famously says, this doesn't really get good until you're 3 or 4 sessions in, and is very focused on the interrelations that develop between character and setting. It's got the very specific moves of a PBTA thing, but in many cases they're very loosely designed, which the high degree of improv that this game requires.
It does. It definitely demands a lot from.
Oh my god!
Especially the groundskeeper, but nobody can be really slacking off.
You need to be real good at high spooky improv, and I'm like, naming a move "be real good at improv" is not a cure-all for this. There were a number of times that I'm reading it and I'm like, what does that mean though? What? You're telling me vaguely. Let me find page 50. I have a specific, what does that mean? It feeds the appetite of the horror servant. I'm like, what? Is this too abstract for me? Is this my time combat for this game?
Well, I think that's just it gives the thing whatever it is wanting from the bride. So it could be could be carnal. It could be comfort. It could be simply the creature is lonely. It could be literally hungry. Maybe it eats the piece of clothing. Like it's left open to interpretation. I feel like the core element of Powered by the Apocalypse that Bluebeard's Bride is most leans on or is most inspired by would be the conversation and question asking triggered by certain moves. Because that's such a foundational element of this game. And that's something that really came into the headway through Powered by the Apocalypse, is asking players, oh, well, what's the name of the warlord that you're fighting? Or what's the name of this feature of the game setting, in
why do you feel so guilty about your past with him?
Right, exactly. And that gives the player an opportunity to give them some narrative agency. And that's what this game is about, is giving players narrative agency, but in very, very focused ways on a very specific set of themes. And,
let me read you a section from the GM direction chunk. This is on page 68. At other times, the dance flags as the players lose the beat and look to you to bolster them. The house itself holds its breath, and it is up to you to push forward, to describe how the horrors respond to the woman encroaching on their space. And I'm like, if I'm a GM, this doesn't help me unless I am a very abstract thinker who loves metaphor. And maybe that's okay.
This is a very metaphorical game.
Don't play this if you do not.
I said right at the beginning.
If you don't love metaphor with all your heart, don't play Bluebeard's Bride.
Yeah, don't expect the typical thing oh, well, how did the Bluebeard turn those former brides into birds and now he's keeping them in bird cages? That doesn't. Yeah, that's not. It's not a question. That's not a question you should be thinking of. It's a metaphor.
Do not expect at any point an explanation as to why his beard is blue.
Right.
That question never comes up.
As one example.
I have delved into this because folklore and fairy tales are one of my things. Nobody knows. It's just his beard's blue. It just is.
Why is his beard blue? Because then you get the assonance with the word beard.
But it was originally written in French.
The only other...
Which is Barbe Bleu, I suppose.
My point is proven. Submit. This battle of wits is at an end.
I think we mentioned, but we didn't really go too far into explaining. The wedding ring is a core mechanic of the game, and that's the only thing I want to do before we move on to how it does what it does.
See, I've made most of my how it does points, but okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're blurring the lines a bit. The wedding ring is is basically which sister is in control, which aspect of the bride is in control. So the wedding ring is passed between players. Only one can have it at a time, and there are certain moves that are triggered only when you have the ring. And some of these are sort of meta moves, like Shiver and Fear is explicitly when the person with the ring has a reaction, a visible reaction, a noticeable reaction to the horrors. That when the player does, then the groundskeeper can activate the Shiver from Fear move, which it basically keep the ring and choose two of the three things, or pass the ring and choose one. It infects the bride with its perversion. It has the bride in its clutches right now, or it speaks to you. Take one trauma, just you, sister. And so, and again, there are moves to relinquish control. There are moves to take control, to trade it. And there's a lot of the gameplay is focused on who has the ring because they call the shots. And so that's the last crucial, game mechanic that needs to be mentioned. But, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to come in about Shivering with Fear specifically because this gets into an interesting territory, the whole subject of bleed. And I never know how well known bleed is outside the circles in which I move. It originally comes out of Nordic LARP. Bleed is the idea that emotions that you feel when you are playing a game, and within Nordic LARP, explicitly LARPs, which can go on a lot longer than a tabletop roleplay session. emotions that you feel in character can bleed over into your everyday life. You can have flashbacks to them. And this goes back to the early days of Nordic LARP. But if you've ever seen the Nordic LARP book, which is an extraordinary thing, it won the Diana Jones Award a few years ago. There is a free PDF on the internet. It's a coffee table book chronicling the early days of Nordic LARP, which was insane. Mm-hmm. I mean, genuinely insane. There's one game I'm particularly thinking of. I can't remember the name of it, but it was modeled not explicitly, but quite closely on that TV miniseries, the day after. I think I mean the day after.
Oh boy,
the one, the nuclear war one.
Threads. Threads are the day after.
No, not Threads, not the British one, the American one.
Oh yeah, the day after. Yeah.
But the idea was you turned up at this LARP, and it was like a Midwestern town, or obviously somewhere in Scandinavia, and you role play. And because it was Nordic LARP, you developed characters before the game started, and developed your interrelationships, and you knew who everyone was. And there was a several hours of just kind of playing, and then the sirens go off, and everyone rushes into the basement of the town hall. Which is full of boxes marked supplies and food and bandages and stuff like that. I believe most of them actually contain subwoofers, because at that point the bombs go off and the lights go out. And if I recall correctly, at that point the people running the game basically locked the doors and left them in there sobbing for about 6 hours. It's games that intended to traumatize people or to put them through traumatic experience, because they didn't really understand that this stuff did have knock-on effects.
Were the results of the Stanford prison experiment never translated into Norwegian? Is this?
You have to understand the way that Europe regards America. It's just everything that happens over there is insane, and does not necessarily have bearing on the real world. No, read the book. It's extraordinary. I haven't read it in a few years. I'm probably doing that game a huge disservice, but the description is extraordinary. Bleed and similar concepts came out of that. The idea that you can actually genuine effects, good and bad. People fall in love in a game and discover that they have those reciprocal feelings outside the games as well, which, if they're in a real world relationship, can cause problems. With a game like this that has mechanics that are specifically triggered by players' reactions to events rather than characters' reactions to events, like Shivering with Fear, and I made a bunch of notes about this, I would be really interested to know if the designers were aware of the concept of bleed. And this is something, because it's Nordic LARP, one of the interesting things about the Nordic LARP scene is that whereas an awful lot, the regular game scene, there are the practitioners, there are the designers and the players, and then there are the academics, and the academics tend to be players, but they don't tend to be designers as well. Whereas in Nordic LARP, it's a massive spectrum, and everybody crosses over. And you go to one of the big Nordic LARP conventions, and the program just, there's highly academic stuff on the program. There's highly how to do the logistics for a 400-person LARP. And people just wander from one to the other. It's not expected that the academics go to the academic stuff and the games designers go to the game design stuff. It's a very, very broad church. It's wonderful, and it's so rich as a result. I would be really interested to know if the designers of Bluebeard's Bride were aware of Bleed, had come across it, had read anything about it,
or if this is parallel.
Chose consciously would consciously bringing some of those elements in, and had thought about whether Shivering with Fear is a safe mechanic and how it sits alongside something like the X card.
Or is this parallel
because
evolution?
It strikes me as an element that's quite possibly. I mean, it's one of those concepts. You say it and it's, oh yes, obviously I can see how that would happen. So it's quite possible it's cropped up simultaneously. But I'm really interested about authorial intention with that particular mechanic, and some of the stuff in here which seems intent, it is pushing people deliberately to feel uncomfortable in themselves rather than as their characters. And I talked in, I think it was the one about Night's Dark Agents, about games that are actually about horror and games that just simply play with the tropes of horror. This is explicitly a horror game. This is a game that is supposed to make you feel disturbed and uncomfortable and confront things that have come from quite possibly from a dark place within you. And it's worth saying again. We said it at the top. I'm going to say it again now. It's a very feminine horror, and the game reiterates that several times. And I do feel slightly odd that here we are, three middle-aged white guys. In societal terms, in gender role terms, we are the oppressors, whether we want to be or not. Simply the fact that we exist gives us a certain position within that structure. There is an awkwardness in talking about some of the themes that this game brings up and the way that it confronts them, partly because it's not our territory to talk about, although we should and we need to confront that and we need to understand stuff like that, but also because for us it's secondhand, because we have not lived these horrors. We've not felt, confronted by this kind of oppression, this kind of abuse, this kind of, physical. At least it is possible for men to male rape exists and happens, but it is by no means as frequent as female rape. And I'm slightly drying up. With what I'm saying here. I've driven myself into an alley. There is an awkwardness I noticed it when we started off. There was an awkwardness in the way we were talking about it. There was a certain amount of dancing around the subject and not quite wanting to engage with it. Because as a guy, there are bits of this game that are not comfortable to read because it's about us as oppressors.
Well, it's not about us. It's about the patriarchy.
Well,
it's about...
It's about archetypes, yes.
It's about societal structural violence against women and how... it benefits all males, whether they acknowledge it or not, in ways that it's structural. It's not something that can be easily resolved. For example, I was thinking about this game and I realized I am interested in playing it, but I would not want to play it at a table that is, less with more male players than female players. I would not want to do that because I don't think the game is one of the central points of one of the principles for the Groundskeeper is center the story on women's experiences. And it's, I think you make a point. The three of us here, cannot know what it is like to be a woman in society now and what their experience is like just because, Yeah.
And that has a knock-on effect that I would be very cautious of any man who said, oh yeah, I'll run Bluebeard's Bride. No problem at all. I could do that.
Yeah, I would exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, that is something. And so that is a challenge with this game. And if anybody, this game sort of proves role-playing games, can be challenging art. This is certainly, I think, proof of that because, part of art is, challenging our expectations and our perspectives on things. And, guess what this game is already doing, even though we haven't even played it. So just the fact that discussing the game, makes us think of and confront these, the violence that, another theme is actually, you could make a really good argument. This is also a game about, capitalism because, in the fairy tale, in the story that they tell, they say that the bride is very poor and Bluebeard is very rich, and the bride is very, very much wants to make the marriage work because it'll benefit her family, and the wealth is used as a tool by Bluebeard multiple ways to keep the bride in her place and keep himself safe from the consequences of his own actions. He can kill as many brides as he wants. Because he is wealthy, he can always get a new bride. So that would be... I thought of that, and obviously this book is not making that interpretation explicitly. That is, but
it's kind of baked in.
Yeah. I mean, there are... Yeah, so before we get off into theory about, patriarchy and capitalism in terms of, as a separate subject... Yeah, so how do people play it, I guess we should talk about?
One more thing I would add to the how it does it. All right, am I allowed to do my future tense rant? Should we just take it as read? I I'm not going to do this again, but because this was a short book, I counted how many times the word will was used in 107 small pages with generous white space, and it came out to be about 120. Mm-hmm. And, 5 of those are in quotes. 10 of them are in, dialogue where it's okay, but come on. I'm like, page 76 has the word will 6 times on one page. And it's such a good book, and it's so well written otherwise, that having each of these little eye pokes is, it's a missed opportunity. Putting the future tense in games belongs in a museum. It's like believing in phrenology, and now I'll stop. The other thing I'll add about, and it's not, that's a complaint. Definitely a complaint. This next comment is not so much a complaint as just a statement of how it is. The book is relentlessly somber. It is not quite grim, but it is very sober and takes itself very seriously. And from what I've heard, that carries over into sessions, that people who have run this and played it are, tell me that, people will titter nervously, but nobody's busting a gut while playing Bluebeard's Bride. And that sobriety and that seriousness really does seem to come through at the table as well. Which, again, my source who's run this a bunch said, that may be because of the self-selecting group of people who play this. That if you show up for Bluebeard's Bride, you've got your game face on. You're not just doing this for some casual yucks.
Yeah, the book at the very beginning, its introductory material does make a point of saying to be sober. And there's a whole page, why play a horror game. And I think that's not, there's a page where it says you wouldn't go to a serious game wearing, here it is, actually page 11, expectations, setting expectations. You would not show up to a funeral wearing a clown suit and should not play a horror game when you would rather play a game about superheroes.
Bada bing.
So it's designed to push your limits of your intellectual dark side and exercise everyone's twisted imaginations. But that means, and then it goes on. But it's very explicit about what it wants you to think and what mood you should be in, what tone it should be. And I haven't seen this is, out of all the games you're studying, this is even more explicit than Delta Green in terms of how to set the expectation and how to play it correctly, or at least to best effect, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I mean, I would draw a difference between Continuum tells you how to play it correctly, which is, you have to memorize this stuff and you have to do this and this and this. This, as opposed to doing that, sets expectations. And for a game that is all about constraint of the characters, it is not quite so bossy towards the players. And I think part of this is that, one game was written in the 90s and one game was written in the 21st century. And the expectation that the GM and the players are going to be at each other's throats and have an adversarial relationship is something that we are thankfully sweeping more and more into the dustbin of history. Page 36 emphasizes cooperation with the GM, which, I'm like, man, what a breath of fresh air. What a concept. This is great. The idea that you might actually be working together to create the experience collaboratively instead of, the players constantly being, well, how can I derail this? And the GM asking, okay, how can I keep my train locked on its tracks despite all those players meddling with it? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I did appreciate that. That's nice. One of my notes just says, intoxicatingly free of tabletop RPG's wargaming roots. So
Yeah.
I do like this very much in its attempt to expand what gaming is. And, you know, I would rather see something that attempts to do something very new, which this does, and hits that with 90% or 95% accuracy, than something that is 110% the most perfect D&D module from 1996. You know? It's like, let's do something new. Let's do something different. And this definitely does that.
Yeah. Something mature and something for adults in the best sense, as we talked about, not the shallow, edgelord way.
Yeah, it feels really fresh. I mean, apart from the one thing I said, which because I've read far too many role-playing games, all the players are playing the same character thing, which has precedence.
But
almost
barely.
all the rest of it.
Barely.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. But the rest of it, from the approach to the way it's structured, I have to say I was not a great fan of the way the book was structured, but it's clear enough. Mm-hmm. As Greg said, 90% of this is stuff I genuinely felt I hadn't seen before, and it's done really well. There are a couple of things that stand out. The use of game terms, the use of moves in particular. Whenever they crop up in the text, it's like somebody has done it in falsetto. The tone just jumps off the page and feels slightly wrong. But apart from, and that is a niggle. That is not, and again, that's if one was playing it, and I've not played it, I have to admit, if you were playing it and somebody starts talking in game terms, it's going to break the narrative spell. And this is what we're named after. That's Ludonarrative Dissonance right there. But that is a quibble. That's nothing more than a very minor blip in what is otherwise an amazing attempt to break really new ground for what a role-playing game can be and do, and how the stories it can tell, and in particular the way those stories are going to affect
All right, well, and I'll add another thing that came up, and I'm not sure how strictly this is observed at the table, and if it works or is always done, but let's call it the protagonist barrier, right? In most games, there are areas where the player has absolute sovereignty, or there is an assumption of absolute sovereignty. It's like, okay, in Delta Green, you can tell me what my character experiences, but you can't tell me how I react to it. You don't get to, tell me my emotions. You don't get to tell me I've fallen in love with so-and-so. Or that, I take an instant dislike to this character. And, it's even more explicit in Unknown Armies, where I'm like, okay, the only thing you can absolutely make another person do is die. You can persuade them. You can say, oh, if you do what I say, good things, and if you defy me, bad things, but you cannot change someone's mind. Whereas here, the GM can say, you feel this, and you do this. You raise your hand to the scarred countenance of the dead bride and stroke it lovingly, and that's okay. And it's like they've replaced the assumption of player sovereignty with an X card. And it's like if the GM starts saying, you are deeply aroused by this demonic goat man, instead of saying, no, I'm not, you just X card it. And it's a very fundamental change, and therefore very interesting. And I'm curious to see how that works out in real time at the table. And I can see how it works out a little better, because it's less a case where there is where you have your guy, the quote unquote your guy, and again, guy in Bluebeard's Bride, but you have your character who is uniquely yours, whom you have created, and is, in a sense, you have power over them. I don't want to use the word sovereignty again and repeat myself, but it's here you don't even have that unique individual who is your own character. You're all together collectively playing the bride. And the ring serves as a steering wheel moment by moment, but everyone has input. So I can see how giving the groundskeeper GM some input too is less jarring than it would be in a more traditional ongoing campaign style game where everyone is expected to stay in the lane of their PC.
Yeah, it does really break down that limit between, you have your one playing piece in this game to you don't even have that. I think in another way it really emphasizes, and this is again part of this way, and this is actually thematic, connecting to like a woman's body is not her own. Like that, in a patriarchy, you have to do what you're told. You have to fulfill certain societal obligations. You can't be yourself and choose what to do. Like you can't even leave the house. Like you are there. You have to know your place essentially. And so that's another way it's reinforcing its theme through game mechanics. I think probably the most for me, one of the things that really caught my eye was really on the section of curating the rooms, page 76, 77, because that's the core of the game, is exploring different rooms, and each room has a different horror in it. And while there are example ones, and while there is a book of them, the Book of Rooms, most of the time you have to make them up. And the section on settle, each room has a threat. So settle on the room thread, which underlie the horrors and haunt each room and reflect the aesthetic and vulnerabilities of the bride revealed during character creation. As we mentioned earlier, the questions are asked of each aspect, each sister. These threats are separated into body, motherhood, religion, and sexuality, each with subsets reflecting greater refinement. And so, again, very explicit. This is about the grim realities that face women every day. This is like, it's not like you can choose what make up whatever you want. You have to pick one of those four major themes and then work within a sub theme. And so this is a game that's going to get very uncomfortable pretty quickly for at least one player, I would imagine, because talking about family, family problems under motherhood, or religion, that thing you always bring up during polite dinner conversations.
Is the bride open to unholy influences, though?
Right. Or in sexuality, abortion is literally one of the horrors, one of the threats of the room. And the book multiple times about like, oh, this bride died because she miscarried and she blamed herself, and she died instead of letting Bluebeard be disappointed in her. And, so yeah, this game is going to go there. It is not, hiding or minimizing the threats, and the kind of horror you'll be seeing in this game. It says, no, these are the things that this game is about.
Use violence and love to teach her how to think is one of the room moves. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm going to drag it a little bit back to the more technical. What's that mean, though?
Well, that's a great thing. It's a metaphorical game, so like you can interpret that however you want. I think that's also the people who play this game probably have. I imagine the players for this game are very self-selecting. You're not going to get casual players, because once a casual person hears anything about this game, they're going to know if they're going to be into it at all, and like it's going to, in some ways, filter out unsuitable players. I think I would imagine most of the time.
when I was trying to think of how to explain not just Bluebeard's Bride, but in a sense, the larger experience of loving horror and loving disturbing movies, I finally saw Audition recently, speaking of female-centered horror, but it made me think of the traditional Chicago beverage Malort. Have you guys heard of this?
Oh, yeah.
No idea.
It is.
I'm a big
It's
fan.
yeah. It is like if absinthe is too sweet and gentle for you, try Malort, which is a raw and more bitter wormwood derived liqueur. And I went.
See my previous notes on how Europe regards American culture.
Well, but the great thing about Malort is just like, the horror movie tells you you're not silly for thinking the world is scary. If you are depressed and feeling blue and you're like, man, I need a drink, Malort is that drink, because you will drink it and you will be like, yes, whoever made this gets it. They know the troubles of the world. But at the same time, you won't want to keep drinking. So it's sort of, it's like when an oil well catches fire and you blow it up to put the fire out. It's a little bit like that for Shame Spirals. It's a great thing.
To go on to our last question, why people play it that way, I've actually had more than my fair shots of Malort, and I realize at this point I only drink Malort when I can get other people in the room to take a shot with me, because I don't want to suffer alone. But if they suffer, then I derive enjoyment from it, to see them suffer, and I'm suffering the same thing as well. So.
Wow! Oh no, almost all of my Malort drinking was done by myself. So.
Oh well.
Which is
not.
Just to be the third point in that triangle, I have no intention of ever trying.
It's been
if I can possibly.
It's been described as it tastes like a punch in the nose. It's amazing.
It's actually the aftertaste. It lasts for like 10 minutes.
I would say it tastes more like the way a stubbed out cigar smells.
Mm-hmm.
You're not selling it.
That's the point.
I've drunk stuff. I've drunk Chinese medicinal wine with baby rats drowned.
Good Lord!
I'm not going anywhere near.
I would try that wine.
It was like a strong sherry. It was surprisingly palatable.
I don't know, but I would just think that I would worry about them looking at me. We seem to have drifted.
As I recall, their eyes hadn't opened.
But
that makes it okay. But okay, so yes, so the suspicion might be that people play Bluebeard's Bride to commiserate. Is that what you're getting at? And that it validates your feelings and your experiences, even when those feelings and experiences are bad and dark.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's sometimes all you can do is say, oh yeah, that's terrible. I know what you mean. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think there's an element of catharsis as well, which you mentioned in there as well. Just not that the story itself will have a cathartic ending, but simply the pleasure of coming out the other side and knowing that you have been through those experiences and that you have survived them. You've confronted them and you, the player, have come out the other side. And I can think of movies and indeed some albums that are like that as well, though not tapped into the female experience so much. There are pieces of art that exist to be tolerated, not tolerated. Tolerated is the wrong word, but endured. And I know people who've watched certain Throbbing Gristle movies. I'm not going to go into details about
sure.
it. I'm forgetting the guy. My ex-wife was quite into his work. She wrote books about death traditions and stuff. But a guy who his films are, actual films of autopsies and stuff like that. And there are connoisseurs of his movies.
Huh.
Although I never met one who actually particularly enjoyed them. And I think there's obviously a very different thing, but I think there's an overlap here. One comes out of an experience like that feeling not that one never has to do it again, but simply that one got to the end and one can then appreciate it as a whole work and digest it in safety in a calmer place.
Yeah.
And take things away from it.
I think that's the key, is that this game is about the impact. A game that you play for 3 hours with friends, and then the imagery and the imagery you evoke and the story that you tell, like, lives with you. I mean, certainly if I see a movie that moves me, I'm thinking about it for days afterwards, and then every once in a while, even for months or even years later, I'll like, oh yes. It haunts you in a way, but in a way that's not like bad. It's just moving. It changed your perspective, if even only a little bit.
This makes sense because I have seen Audition.
Yeah, exactly.
This makes sense because I have seen The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the appeal of horror in general, is to, I mean, some of it is the good guy victory, but a lot of the greatest horror movies aren't like the good guy doesn't win. I remember the first horror movie I saw not the first horror movie, but I remember seeing Night of the Living Dead as a child, and that one, the main character, spoiler for a 1968 movie, the main character dies at the end, shot by mistake by other humans. And I didn't know that you could have a movie where the good guy didn't win. That I didn't know that was possible. I'm just picturing you seeing this with your jaw dropped open, and then like your older brother comes in behind you. He's like, "Also, Santa Claus isn't real." I mean, probably. That does sound like something my brother would do. But
as long as you're already at the emotional nadir, let's get all this other stuff out of the way too.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of role-playing games are success stories. They are, I mean, the majority of power fantasies, the vast majority are success stories. You are expected to succeed, and there's not necessarily going to be a happy ending, but you at least get to the end of a story and you survive. Players go into Bluebeard's Bride with a very strong anticipation that their character is going to die horribly at the end.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Or a fate worse than death. She's transformed into a monster, or imprisoned in some horrible way.
Co-opted by Bluebeard.
Mm-hmm. Turning and becoming another like enforcer of the patriarchy, inflicting violence on future brides instead of Bluebeard. Like, which I feel is one of the more insidious things that it does, is that like a lot of the times the people threatening the bride are other women, other servants, or former brides, that instead of turning against their oppressor, they're turning against each other, and which is another grim reality that a lot of women face. So,
But going into any artistic experience, and I categorize Bluebeard's Bride within that, knowing or having a good sense of how it's going to conclude is a kind of an unusual thing. I have a friend who says he always reads the last couple of pages of a book before really starting it, so he knows he's going to end. Very famously, the Billy Crystal character in When Harry Met Sally does the same thing. I've never understood that, but I can see how it transforms one's reaction to a work, particularly an interactive work like this. And you have to remember, interactivity changes everything, as I used to tell my narrative students. The fact that you're inside this story. If you were watching this would be a relentlessly horrible movie. It would be, it's because there isn't an awful lot of narrative structure. There isn't an awful lot of story structure to it. It's structure, yes, not necessarily story structure.
It would have a lot of spectacle.
But the fact that you're on the inside, you're experiencing it essentially firsthand in your mind's eye. But at the same, you have limited ability to act and react because of the constraints that we were talking about earlier on. that's a really, really interesting and, again, I'm going to say groundbreaking framework for the form, giving, making sure that your players can't do everything that they might want to do, limiting their possible reactions.
Speaking of...
But at the same time, making sure that they do have freedom to act. They do feel that they ought to nominally be able to do something about this. I'd be interested if there's groups that, or players out there who in a particular situation don't tap the X card, go, no, you've given me these 3 moves that my character can do. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to break out of the game mechanic restrictions you've given me here in a way that tabletop role-playing games you can do.
Yes.
You can never do in a computer game because of the nature of the form, but you can do in role-play if there is a consensus there that you are going to break the rules. You can smash that wall, break out, and do the unthinkable. And I really hope there are, because I think, again, let's push the form. Let's take this into places, and particularly stories of this type and subject matter of this type. We should all be fighting back against this. We should all be going beyond what the rules say that we should and shouldn't do. We should all be finding new ways to react and fight back.
When you were talking, James, it made me realize that
that I'm full of shit.
No. Comparing this to other role-playing games, and especially, how you expect it to survive. I mean, and if you think about just as storytelling, like most role-playing games are procedurals. They're stories of like how a group of characters does a thing, or do they do the thing, or do they not? They're very, plot driven. But that's not the only type of fiction there is. There is character-driven fiction. And really, if you think of Bluebeard's Bride not as a plot-driven story about what happens to this bride when she goes into Bluebeard's mansion and what her fate is, if you think of it as the character study of a doomed bride, a doomed young woman who has been whisked into this mansion, and it's about her. And that's what the game is really about. Who is this bride? What are her fears? What are her hopes? How does, what makes up her personality, her emotions? And obviously with the sisters, you get to really interrogate that and really examine as she has conflicts within herself, which is something role-playing games typically don't do. Intra-personality conflicts. I'm conflicted between 2 drives to escape and to help this person, or for example. So I think that's what they're really trying to do is it's reveal this character, rather than, and by setting the fate as a foregone conclusion, she's doomed one way or the other. Then you don't have to worry about that. You can just focus on understanding this very nuanced, multi-layered person, and have it revealed to you through gameplay, what the effect the world has had on her. So I think that's really very interesting in terms of game design, because not many games really do that. And certainly not to this level of detail. This is a literary novel, but, that's introspective about this young person who is doomed, but who is this person? What are they about? And we get to see that in linear fiction a lot, but not in gameplay very often, simply because of how it's structured. Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Bluebeard's Bride.
Hope maybe someday one or all of us will get to play it. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think I would ever want to play it without a majority of the players at the table being female, simply because, it's the patriarchy. I can't.
The only exception to that, I would play with a female groundskeeper and all the other players being male.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that would be very interesting. I mean, there would have to be the right kind of, as we were saying, self-selecting male players who were up for taking the experience seriously.
That would,
but I
see. I just had the thought: how would you do this as an immersive LARP? And immediately, my better nature is like, you wouldn't. It would be too dangerous and traumatizing. It would be like going through one of those extreme haunted houses. Only there's only one person doing it, and it's not jump scares, it's emotional trauma. So,
and part of this game's appeal, or sort of like how it does what it is through metaphor. So you can't have you can't make up bird women in cages, on the fly as symbolizing of how they're,
First the player would have to write out a detailed psychological inventory and then submit it to the GMing team, who would then get 4 or 5 months to develop a series of symbolic challenges to their psyche. So
yeah, it would be a little much. Well, I think that covers it. So thank you all for listening to this episode. Again,
I do have one more thing to add, one tiny detail, which is that as I was reading this, I kept thinking about the book Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which in many ways, I'm like, you can really see the parallels between the traditional, the Gothic novel of the woman with really great hair running away from a spooky house at night genre and the process of Bluebeard's Bride, or at least the sort of threats and constraint of Bluebeard's Bride. As we wrap up, once again, thank you to all our backers and supporters, specifically in this case, Sean Jameson.
A special thank you to Chris Hammond for backing this Kickstarter.
Yes, enormous gratitude to Trevor Hannon for making all of this possible. I hope you guys are enjoying this, because we certainly are.
It's true.